Have you ever experienced that eerie feeling that something or someone is watching you? That inanimate object? Well, in actuality, this story isn't far from that very same idea and feeling. This story is about Robert the Doll, which dates back to the early 1900s, when a young boy named Eugene Robert Otto was given a one-of-a-kind handmade doll by a servant that worked for his parents in his home. Eugene, who everyone called Gene, named the doll Robert and quickly became attached to his new friend. The home where Eugene lived, now called the Artist's House, is located at 534 Eaton Street and was built in 1890 and 1898. It was here that Eugene was given Robert, and where a friendship that lasted throughout his lifetime and beyond was forged. While he seemed like an ordinary cloth doll, it wasn't long before Robert was involved in strange and somewhat terrifying events. The first hint that something was out of the ordinary happened was one night when Jean, who was the only 10-year-old, awoke to find Robert the doll sitting at the end of his bed staring at him. Moments later, his mother was awakened by his screams for help and the sounds of furniture being overturned by her son's bedroom. Jean cried for help, begging his mother to rescue him. When she finally was able to wrench the locked door open, she saw poor Jean curled up in fear on his bedroom in shambles, and Robert the doll sitting at the foot of his bed. Robert did it were the only words Jean could get out, the same words he would later use many times throughout his childhood when something strange, mysterious, or destructive would happen. Nobody knows for sure why or how the child's plaything could actually wreak havoc on a child's bedroom, or do anything at all. After all, it was just a toy, right? But the weird and unexplainable didn't stop at that one occurrence. Jean's parents would often hear their son upstairs talking to the doll and getting a response back in a totally different voice. They reported seeing the doll speak and witnessing his expressions change. Giggling and sightings of Robert running up and down the steps as staring out the upstairs window were also reported. Robert continued to live with Jean throughout his lifetime. After Jean's parents died, he moved back into their home with his wife, Anne. Jean decided the doll needed a room of his own and placed him in the upstairs room that had a window overlooking the street. Anne felt uneasy with Robert in the house and throughout. Although she couldn't put her finger on it, she wanted Jean to lock up the doll in the attic where he could do no harm. Jean conceded, and as one could imagine, Robert the doll was not happy with the new digs. Soon, visitors to the home heard footsteps in the attic, sounds of someone pacing back and forth and devilish giggling. Neighborhood children reported seeing Robert watching them from the window in the upstairs bedroom and told accounts of the doll actually mocking them as they walked to school. When Jean heard this, he immediately went to investigate, knowing that he had locked Robert in the attic and there was no way he could be sitting by the window of the upstairs bedroom. But to his complete shock, when he opened the door to the bedroom, there was Robert sitting in the rocking chair by the window. Jean locked Robert back up in the attic several times, each time discovering him sitting by the window in the same upstairs bedroom. Finally, Jean Otto had died in 1974. When the new owner moved into the house on Eaton Street, their 10-year-old daughter was delighted to find Robert the doll in the attic. But her delight ended soon when she claimed that Robert was alive and that the doll wanted to hurt her. She often awoke in the middle of the night screaming in fear and told her parents that Robert had moved about the room. Is Robert really possessed? Many believe that the origins of Robert's evil lies in one who originally gave him to Jean Otto, the servant who worked for Jean's parents. This woman was supposedly mistreated by her bosses, and to punish them, it is believed that she cursed the doll with voodoo and black magic. That might explain the many mysterious and frightening experiences people have had with Robert the doll. But if so, wouldn't the haunting end when the owners died? No one really knows for sure, but one thing remains constant. Robert the doll continues to taunt and scare those who come to view him, especially guests to the museum who attempt to take photos. Many have reported their cameras becoming inoperable when they tried to take a picture of Robert, only to begin working again when they left the museum. Robert the doll sits inside of a glass case, but it doesn't seem to stop him from inflicting fear and discomfort in the museum and staff visitors. Staff members have reported Robert's facial expressions changing, hearing demonic giggling, and even having seen Robert put his hand up onto the glass. One of the creepiest parts of the truly scary movie series, The Conjuring, is the evil possessed doll Annabelle, who makes up the cornerstone of Ed and Lorraine Warren's spooky museum of trophies. Annabelle was just a run-of-the-mill Raggedy Ann doll. Donna, the previous owner, had gotten Annabelle from her mother in 1970. Mom bought the used doll at a hobby store. Donna was a college student at the time and living with a roommate named Angie, and at first, neither thought the doll was anything special. But over time, they noticed Annabelle seemed to move on her own. At first, it was really subtle, just changes in position, the kinds of things that could be written off as the doll began jostled. But the movement increased, and within a few weeks it seemed to become fully mobile. The girls would leave the apartment with Annabelle on Donna's bed and return home to find it on the couch. Their friend Lou hated the doll. He thought there was something deeply wrong with it, something evil. But the girls were modern women and didn't believe in that sort of thing. There must be an explanation, they reasoned, but soon Annabelle's actions got even weirder. Donna began to find pieces of parchment paper in the house with messages written on it. "Help us," they would say, or "Help Lou." Just to make the whole thing that much creepier, nobody in the house had parchment paper. Where the hell did it come from? The escalation continued. One night, Donna returned home to find Annabelle in her bed with blood on her hands. The blood, or some form of red liquid, seemed to be coming from the doll itself. That was enough. Donna finally agreed to bring them in their medium. The sensitive sat with the doll and told the girls that long before their apartment complex had been built there had been a field on that property. A 7-year-old girl, Annabelle Higgins, had been found dead in that field. Her spirit remained, and when the doll came into the house, the girl latched onto it. She found Donna and Angie to be trustworthy. She just wanted to stay with them. She wanted to be safe with them. Being sweet, nurturing types, they both nursing students, Donna and Angie, agreed to let Annabelle stay with them. And that's when all hell broke loose. Lou started having bad dreams. Dreams where Annabelle was in his bed, climbing up his leg as he lay frozen, sliding up his chest to his neck, and closing her stuffed hands around his throat, choking him. He would wake up terrified, head pounding, like all the blood had been cut off to his brain. He was freaked out. He was worried about the girls as well. A few days later, he and Angie were hanging out planning a road trip when they heard someone moving around in Donna's room. They froze. Was it a break-in? Was there an intruder in the apartment? Lou crept over to the door, listening to rustling within. He threw open the door, and everything was as it should be, except Annabelle was off of the bed and sitting in a corner. As he approached the doll, Lou was consumed with that feeling, a burning on the back of the neck that indicates someone was staring at you. And he spun around. Nobody was there. The room was empty. And then suddenly, pain on his chest. He looked in his shirt and saw a series of raking claw marks, rough ditches in the flesh that burned. He knew Annabelle had done it. The weird claw marks began healing almost immediately. They were totally gone in 2 days. They were like no wounds of any of them had ever seen before. They knew they needed more help, and they turned in an Episcopalian priest, who in turn called Ed and Lorraine Warren. It didn't take that long for the Warrens to come to their conclusion that there was no ghost in this case, that there was an inhuman spirit, a demon attached to the doll. But they warned that doll wasn't possessed. Demons don't possess things, only people. It was clinging to the doll, manipulating it, in order to give the impression of a haunting. The target was really Donna's soul. A priest performed an exorcism on the apartment, and the Warrens took possession of the doll. They put it in a bag and began the long drive home. Ed agreed to stay off the highways because there was concern that the demon might fuck with the car, and at 65 miles an hour that would be disastrous. And sure enough, as they drove the back roads, the engine kept cutting out, the power steering kept failing, and even the brakes gave them trouble. Ed opened the bag, sprinkled the doll with holy water, and the disturbances stopped for a moment. Ed left the doll next to his desk. It began levitating. That happened a couple of times, and then it seemed to just quit, finally laying quiet. But in a couple of weeks, Annabelle was back to her old tricks, and she started appearing in different rooms in the Warren house. Sensing that the doll was ramping back up, the Warrens called in a Catholic priest to exorcise Annabelle. The priest didn't take it seriously, telling Annabelle, "You're just a doll. You can't hurt anyone." Big mistake. On his way home, the priest's brakes failed and his car was totaled in a horrible accident. He did survive. Eventually, the Warrens built a lock case for Annabelle, and she's resided there to this day. The lock case seems to have kept the doll from moving around, but it seems like that whatever terrible entity is attached to it is still there, waiting, biding its time, ready for the day when it can be free again.